Katri Bertram, welcome to Global Health Insights. It's great to have you here today. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Great. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I've really admired your voice and your courage and your insights. That's why I'm so excited to speak with you today. What caught my attention this time was a blog that you wrote about leadership in global health and some lessons that you've learned. You've had so many different roles in global health over the last couple of decades in working for a government, working for a foundation, working for a multilateral agency, working for an NGO. You've seen it from all these different perspectives, including the leadership in those and other organizations. So maybe a great place to start would be just say a little bit about the lessons that you've learned about leadership in global health and that you wrote about in your blog that I'll put in the show notes.
Thanks so much, Peter. As you mentioned, I've worked in lots of different organizations in global health and the development sector more broadly. And one thing I've always been very interested in is how people wield power. So how they use power, how sometimes they don't use their power, and sometimes when they abuse their power. And it's something I've been observing in all of my roles and having seen different leaders have found that very fascinating. It's also something that many of us as staff members or managers and eventually also leaders talk about with our peers. We sometimes share the same pains, some of the same ponderings and questions, and sometimes also the same inspiration. So it's also a community of discussion that many people are engaged in. And then finally, I also do devour all of these leadership and management books that you find at airports, and sometimes also just to understand what could I do better as I climb the career and how can I avoid some of the pitfalls. And one thing that has also really inspired me is reading a lot of biographies by leaders. So why did they choose to lead? Why did they sometimes choose to leave leadership positions? What have their challenges and lessons been? And so as you mentioned, I've been writing this blog in global health for nearly, I'd say, over a decade now. And every couple of years, I'll write a new blog on leadership. And this one was inspired by a couple of books I'd read and leadership lessons I had been observing and speaking about again. And a lot of the reflection also came from issues that we've been talking about over these years that we've known each other, which is very much why are leaders not focused on delivering results? And we can unpack that a bit further when we discuss what that means. But I was reflecting on a couple of these angles in my blogs, and I came up with a list of 5 things that I think work for successful leaders. And again, it's not the first time that somebody has been reflecting on these. There are dozens, hundreds, probably thousands of manuals on the top 7 lessons, the top 3 lessons, the top 5 attributes. But the ones I really focused on, I think, are very relevant to global health and development today, but also in particular looking at what leaders deliver results. So the 5 lessons, if I can quickly just summarize, the first one is a leader has to know what they want, but they also have to know what they want for a specific organization or whatever entity they're leading. So whether it's government or an NGO or a foundation. There's so many leaders, I've fallen for this as well, who are so inspiring with their talking points. They just sell a vision and you are bought right away and you think exactly that is what I want to be part of. But where they are sometimes much more challenged is in how do I deliver this vision or this goal with the organization that I'm working with instead of working against it. And so that is something that I've noticed is quite a challenge for many people to nail. But if they get it right and work with the organization, they can really move mountains. The second one that I've reflected and read on a lot, having worked in different size organizations, is how do you work for purpose and not kind of build a massive bureaucracy? And this is something that is really tricky for many leaders, as I've experienced, because leadership is a lot of power and it's a lot of ego and it's a fear of loss that I've seen in many leaders. So they start getting paranoid and they start instituting rules and regulations so that everybody kind of plays along. And what they then lose is real authentic buy-in of the staff or their partners because they get so bogged down in this bureaucracy. And so things start stagnating and you lose the human kind of critical collective power and thinking that really makes places thrive. The third one is really to focus on purpose. And this is something that is really, really tricky for many organizations. There's so much competition. There's always an issue that is happening externally. Sometimes there's a drive internally to focus on different things. And I've experienced many great leaders who have lost their way because they get confused with all of these different incentives. So they try to be everything for everybody. And at the end of the day, it ends up being nothing in terms of practical progress. The fourth one is really about leading people. It's about understanding your crew. And this is where in my blog I use the analogy of a leadership. You should really, I think of it as steering this big, big machine in stormy waters and different conditions and understanding how the mechanics of your ship is working. And so focusing on the talent and the value of your crew members is something I write about in the blog. Again, something that many leaders start forgetting because they're so high up in their corner office or somewhere very distant from their staff members, and they start looking at organigrams and seeing these boxes of abstract teams or departments and forget that these are really valuable people with valuable skill sets, and they're not often as replaceable as they seem. And I think this is one thing that also is hugely a determining factor for success. And then fifth is something that I think is really difficult for many leaders to accept, which is letting go. Like, when do you know that you are no longer the smartest person in the room, the best trained? You might not have the most kind of up-to-date skill set. And when is it time to delegate power and also think of succession and stepping out? This is something that becomes really tricky because that CEO, president, minister position is the peak, right? That's what we are socialized to work towards. And very few people have a plan for what comes afterwards. And so what we have also in our sector is people who have just been around for too long. They know they should be leaving, but they're not willing to let go because they don't know what else to do. And that's, again, to the detriment of results. And yeah, that's a long summary of quite a short blog that I wrote on the topic.
Yeah, and those are great lessons, bred of experience. Could you maybe just to help help people remember, could you give us 5 words, one word for each of those lessons that you think captures the essence of the
Sure. Knowledge, so knowing what you want and knowing what your organization is about. Purpose, which for me is the focus piece. So what is it exactly that we're doing? Third one, buy-in. So again, do you really have ownership and the troops behind you? Fourth one, appreciation. Really, really important. I could talk about this for hours. And the fifth one is letting go, which is 2 words, but it's a bit of a cheat.
Great. Thank you. And what pulls all those together, as you said a few moments ago, is an overarching focus on the results that you want to achieve in that organization, as opposed to the processes that you want to create and the bureaucracy you might get mired into. And that's been a recurring theme in your thinking, writing, and speaking over many years. Great. So just pulling those together, could you give some examples of leaders? Who were the best leaders you ever worked with? Who were the worst leaders you ever worked with? And feel free to be as specific or non-specific as you like. It's a lot easier to be specific about best leaders than worst leaders, but go for it.
Yeah. I feared you might ask about that, and my role is not to shame anybody. I mean, we're all human beings, and we all have strengths and weaknesses, and also make mistakes. And I think that's one part that I find really important in these leadership discussions and analyses, and even when we criticize leaders, we have this image that the leader should be this almighty deity who never ever does anything wrong, and we treat them as if they should be these rock star celebrities right now, where everything they do should be idolized. And that's also what often their communication teams or strategists portray them as. And I think that's a wrong perception. We should be treating leaders A bit like we do in global health when we talk about doctors, right? You want a competent doctor who knows their stuff, but has the humility to, first of all, listen and come up with a good diagnosis, but also to say, I might not know everything. I might need to ask more people, find out more, learn more, and I might not be the expert on everything. The other analogy I often use is a good leader should be like a teacher. So again, kind of reading your room, understanding who your audience is, helping other people grow, instead of, again, having this all perfect, successful leader in mind. On the other hand, there are so many really bad leaders out there. And I'm sorry to say this, but I have very few good examples and
Mm.
a lot of bad examples. And I don't think they are there because they are bad people or evil or completely incompetent. I just think a lot of people end up in leadership roles without being prepared and without having these leadership skill sets. So there are lots of people who just get promoted or elected or selected into roles without having those critical leadership skills. You asked about best leaders I've had. And again, I've worked directly with leaders, but I've also, of course, progressed in my career. I have two people who come to mind directly. One is I used to work at Save the Children over a decade ago, and there was a Save the Children international CEO called Jasmine Rupert. She was there, I think, until 2015 or so in that role. I didn't work super closely with her, but she radiated a confidence and a authenticity and an appreciation, again, really important for, I think, staff. She felt that she knew what she was getting at and what she wanted for the organization. It was one of these periods of huge transition and strategic reform where different entities were going through a governance reform. But she radiated a confidence of, I know what I'm doing, I know where to get to, and I know what is needed to get done. And the appreciation and the ability to listen to staff. Again, I didn't interact with her for a long time, but I found her incredibly inspiring at the time. She was also a great spokesperson and just treated staff really, really well. And at the time, I also had a great line manager. So it was a combination of being in an organization where the top seemed to be something to aspire to and be inspired by, but also a line management who was called Bijan Nashat, who taught me so many leadership tricks that I've tried to share with all of my teams. So those are two great examples where I feel that the organization did great work. We were really working collectively towards results. And we also had the confidence in our leadership and our management levels, which was really important. The second, I think, success kind of case I would mention is something where I'm a bit torn, and I've written a lot about it, but is my World Bank experience. So I worked in the bank twice, and one of the times was under Jim Kim. And what was, again, going back to my 5 points under Jim Kim, who had made a lot of mistakes and I think had a few scandals as well, but he knew what he wanted the organization to do, and he knew what he could do with this organization, this massive ship. But he came in with an agenda from Partners in Health saying, I really want to get the human capital dimensions on the bank's agenda with health and education and putting the human and social capital at the center. And he also radiated this confidence and this humility, which I think was really great for the bank, which often has investment bankers and kind of private sector leadership in place. And again, there, I didn't work with Jim Kim directly that much, just in the end of my tenure there. But I had an amazing line manager at the time in my first stint at the bank, who was called Claudia from Lombard. She was this wonderful, very senior lady who, again, exuded this confidence and appreciation and humility, which I think is very rare in leaders. Many of them exude a insecurity, which they try to hide behind
Mm.
a bit toxic behavior, or exude a feeling that everything is a threat. Staff is a threat, management is a threat, partners are a threat. And that's just not a healthy working environment. So those are the kind of best offs. And I guess I've hinted at the the worst of cases indirectly as well that way.
Yeah. And I won't push you on the naming and shaming elements, but I did find it super interesting that you said that the majority of leaders that you've come across don't necessarily rise to your level of great leadership. And actually, that's quite a rare phenomenon, even very good leadership, I think you would say. I found that quite interesting. And also how you were talking about the interplay between senior leaders, the team aspects. Would it be fair, just listening to your 5 lessons and your examples, to boil it down, and I know this doesn't cover everything you had to say, to an essence of 2 words, results and humility?
Yeah, I think you can nail it that way. I would add a third one, which is, and I'm not sure how to articulate it, but being attuned to what is happening around you. So listening and having an observational capacity, which I think a lot of leaders just they go into their own little bubble and stop listening and learning and really hearing what's happening, or they don't want to hear it because they don't like criticism or somebody questioning them. So I would say that combination of the three, and then you've got the sweet spot.
Yeah. And on that third one, it probably attaches both to results and humility in terms of learning. On the results side, you often see leaders who do know or say they know what they want in a particular organization, as you were saying, but don't necessarily measure progress to getting there, which is one form of learning. Is that a thing for you? You emphasize the objective, you emphasize the learning. How much is kind of tracking progress against results a thing for you? It is a thing for me, which is why you're smiling, which is why I raised it, which is
It's
why
a
I
thing
wanted
for
to ask
both
you
of
about
us,
it.
which is why we're speaking here, as you know. So my experience is that many leaders start with these, as I said, really ambitious goals. So the result is in global health. We're going to end AIDS. We're going to have health for all. We are going to fund the whole health system, right? I mean, incredibly ambitious goals. And then reality hits, right? I mean, every leader just has a short either government tenure or their post is a term or two. And they start realizing, oh, okay, I'm not going to deliver that huge visionary impact goal that I came here to do. And maybe they already came in upfront knowing they wouldn't. And so the goalposts start shifting quite quickly and this is an interplay of different factors. And we've talked a lot about this before as well, Peter, about where does the board come in? Where do voters come in, et cetera, to say, actually, well, that was just the aspirational goal. But what we really actually are here to deliver is to make sure we grow our operations. And then even there, the goalposts again move a short time beyond because the growth hasn't happened. It says, well, what we're really here to do is to fundraise, right? To meet our funding targets. And so the goalpost of the ultimate result, which in my view, I talked about impact most of the time, it starts moving back from what is known as the impact goal, that kind of right side of the box, as many theories of change have it, to moving closer to outcomes, to outputs, to activities. And it starts blurring into daily business. And so the results tracker kind of shifts from I'm accountable for delivering a vision to delivering some growth to the organization, to delivering on the fundraising targets, to often something really muddly like a transformation process, which no one could really measure the success of. And so I think the tricky part is to hold leaders accountable to that. But as we've discussed for many years as well, it's often the board or, of course, voters or another check or balance mechanism who has to do that accountability. And if the board or, for example, voters say, well, we don't really care about impact or results either, you've kind of lost the game because there's no self-accountability and the system isn't holding the leader accountable either. And that's something I have found, and I know you have too, really fascinating and also really disturbing because why would we in this global health sector or development sector still be doing our work if that really isn't our ultimate target?
Totally. And that's a great description of shifting goalposts in various ways. You pin down what that term means. You said that boards and voters need to hold leaders accountable. And I certainly agree with that. And I guess, would you agree that great leaders also need to hold themselves accountable? Very rare in the scenario you mentioned for leaders to go the other way, not shift the goalposts, say, hey, you know what? We're just not reaching our goal. We're just not reaching our target. In a sense, we're failing to do so. That's a word you don't often hear leaders use. Let's dig in and try to figure out why and try to fix it. And that's a narrative that I haven't heard that much in global health, with some very notable exceptions. But how about you? Do you take that the rarity of that? That's the alternative to the shifting goalpost scenario, and it very much is what you were saying in terms of humility. You need to have a lot of humility to be able to say you're not reaching your target and you're going to double down and try to figure out why and fix it.
Yeah, yeah. And it comes with a lot of risk, right? You have been climbing your career ladder as a leader, and to say I have failed or I have not delivered means you're willing to take a conscious risk to be fired, right? To have the other 7 people waiting behind you say, well, I could deliver it, count on me and please put me in that place instead. It's also really tricky in global health to call that out because global health is still currently very much funded by donor money and taxpayer money. And to tell your donors and taxpayers that you haven't actually delivered what you said you would is, again, admitting, as you would say, and I would use that term as well, humility and being honest and sincere. But that's not how the game works, right? There's a huge risk that you take as well. And I think this is a discussion we're having very acutely at the moment. Are you allowed to criticize anything? Because the backlash might be, well, why should we fund this sector at all? Isn't it all just a waste of money? Then we should just all pull out, right? Donors, governments, and any other stakeholder. And so it takes a lot of risk to take that step, both as a leader, but also for the sector, and say, we're going to kind of make transparent what's really happening and what's working. And most people are not yet willing to do that.
Yeah. And by the way, a great example of this that we've actually both thought about, spoken about, written about is universal health coverage. And I think you mentioned that in terms of big goals. It's a sustainable development goal. Everybody will have universal health coverage. It's was one of WHO's triple billion targets. Everyone talks about it. And of course, that's access to essential services with financial protection. And yet, when you look at the data on universal health coverage, and by the way, we're recording this on December 1st, December 7th, I think, is Universal Health Coverage or UHC Day. And every couple of years, WHO and the World Bank release their UHC report, which I think they're doing again this year, that measures progress on universal health coverage. Every time one of those reports has been released since 2015, as far as I know, it always says the same thing, which is about half the world population has access to universal health coverage. We have to do better. And then 2 years later, about half the world has access to universal health coverage. We have to do better. And then 2 years later, about half the world has universal health coverage. We have to do better. And I'm fully expecting on December 7th, it'll say about half the world has access to universal health coverage. We have to do better. And yet no one tends to connect the dots and say, hey, that's what you said 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. Maybe we should look at why we're not doing better. I mean, in a sense, that emperor has no clothes. And, that goal's not being met. Nobody is calling leaders on that lack of progress. Is that an example of the type of thing you're talking about in terms of, let's say, failing to hold people to account? Let's use that specific example and play out your scenario.
I love that example because it's something I've been working on for nearly most of my global health career. And as you said, I guess there are a couple of things. First of all, yes, that same statistic has been used, I think, at least for 15 years. Half of the global population lacks access to quality health services. And also the financial protection, how many people are falling into poverty has remained the same year on year, decade after decade. I guess there are 2 things that I'd like to unpack. One is anybody really working on universal health coverage? Is that really the right side of the box that they are holding themselves accountable? I would say probably very few global health leaders are. So the UHC story is always one where whatever specific issue an organization works on or is easy to kind of deliver, so usually the vertical issues or a population issue, is claimed by the organization to be the stepping stone to universal health coverage. And whether it's Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, whether it's the Global Fund, we also have World AIDS Day today that we're talking on, whether it is a maternal and child health, the community, they always say, if this is where we start, if we get this right, we can then deliver universal health coverage. We can then expand services. We can expand population coverage and financial protection. And of course, that never happens because we have not ended AIDS. We have not covered all maternal and child health services, and we have not vaccinated everybody. And so the whole promise of we will eventually deliver universal health coverage or even progress towards there significantly never happens because that goalpost has never been at UHC. It has always been somewhere which is much more narrow. And again, that's just a question of humility and transparency to just say, we've actually never even tried to get there. We just use it as lip service, but haven't done much. That's from the global kind of development side. Where it has progressed a lot is at country level. And this is where the really exciting narratives happen. And I'm hoping we get into the future of global health discussion as well, because if you look at what national governments have been doing, there are really great success cases where universal health coverage has been introduced, where it is being introduced, and where both service coverage, equity, so population coverage, and financial protection have increased. Several countries in Africa at the moment, we've got Ghana, Kenya, for example, who are trying to introduce new packages. So that is happening there. Where it's not reflected is in the kind of global aid part of the system. But we will hopefully see a lot more progress when the whole aid and global health paradigm hopefully shifts as well.
Yeah, that also means that those lessons aren't being learned by others. And
Yeah.
you need humility to learn lessons and to, if you will, scale those lessons horizontally. So, last question on this, and then let's shift to the future of global health. Do you expect that in the January executive board meeting at WHO, somebody's going to say, hey, you issued this report on December 7th, and, it says half the world has universal health coverage. We have to do better. That's the same thing you said every 2 years for the last 10 years. What gives? Back to your question about board holding leaders accountable. Is that your expectation then, that somebody will ask that question in the executive board and that will then be the focus of discussion for the WHO executive board?
Sadly, no, I do not expect anybody to do it. It's like peeing in your pool. you you uh, you just don't go there in the global health community. But it's also a interesting aspect to follow, especially in the EB, but also WHA and UNGA meetings. People celebrate that their terms even get mentioned. They're just so happy that UHC is even still listed somewhere on the agenda or in some resolution or somewhere mentioned by a head of state. And again, they get stuck on the rhetoric and celebrating that there was this aspirational intention and the accountability to actually say, well, what happened? Where's the money? What did you do in terms of agencies to shift the vote? Because what progress did we see? Where are the numbers? Those are issues that people find a lot trickier to speak about.
Yeah, and they're not really incentivized to do that. In fact, they're disincentivized to
Absolutely.
do that, as you just pointed out. So let's just cap that off and say this is Peter and Katri asking any one or more of those 34 executive board members in January, if the December 7th report says what we think it'll probably say, which is half the world has universal health coverage, we have to do better. Same thing it said every 2 years for the last 10 years. Please just point that out, ask why, and say maybe this emperor has no clothes, and we should rethink how we're approaching this whole thing. If it ain't working over a 10-year period, maybe it's time to really ask why and do something about it. So this is Peter and Katri asking one of you 34 folks to do that, to lead. Great. So as you mentioned, you and I both worked through what really, we might consider the golden age of global health. Lots of development assistance for health, always increasing between the year 2000, the year 2025, that 25-year golden era. And that's in quotation marks because there were a lot of problems and issues with that golden era. But it was certainly, relatively speaking, very well funded. You might even use the word subsidized, often by Northern donors. Well, one thing's really clear, which is that golden era is over. So, talk a little bit about what you see as the future of global health and what are the implications of that for the types of leadership lessons that you outlined at the outset?
So one thing I would question is that era really over? I think many people, including myself, wish it were because, as you said, it might have been golden, but it had so many challenges and problems, especially issues such as dependency or non-legitimate actors or power relationships that really were not healthy. But I think especially in these weeks, we're seeing that it's not quite dead yet, and it might still suck out a lot of energy and funding from the system. So again, it's World AIDS Day today as we're speaking. The Global Fund just had a miraculously successful replenishment compared to what was expected. And so that old aid system is still there and it is still thriving in a way that is eating a lot of money and attention from the sector. So I think whereas if you would have asked me this question a month ago before the Global Fund replenishment, I would have said, okay, it's really dying its last breaths, and now it's finally time for a new system. I think what we will now see is a competition of two systems, which is the worst of both worlds because the funding and the political attention simply isn't there for both. So I think we're in a really tricky in-between space where that pull to defend the status quo, what, as you said, many of us have really benefited from and benefited from individually because we built our careers and the whole sector has built its kind of existence and raison d'etre around, still holding on. And then there's the other side of the community, especially I think from the country level, which says it's time to let go. We just have to have a different model because the aid system did not deliver for us during the COVID pandemic. There was a huge amount of inequity and delay, and it was a failure in many senses. We simply lost millions of lives because it didn't work as fast as it should have, and there were not the sharing mechanisms and sovereignty that had been promised by the global north. And what we're also seeing is that there's a frustration with the power dynamics. I mean, geopolitics is just changing, and many of the global north actors who used to come with, of course, self-interest, it was always there, but it was packaged a lot as increasing partnership, eye-to-eye cooperation, is now shifting again to pure self-interest, having to justify it. And so, of course, many of the stakeholders in the global south are saying, we just don't want that anymore. We don't want to be humiliated and told that we do not have expertise. We don't know how to run our own systems. We have to keep our dependency. We have to keep doing the issue areas that you from the global north tell us are the best buys and the most efficient investments. And so there's a lot of tension, both in terms of the geopolitics of it, but also these two systems that are now competing for attention.
Interesting. And then what are the implications of that kind of hybrid of some remnants of the quote unquote golden era, which, as you are pointing out, wasn't so golden, and the kind of new, more bilateral, more, let's say, country first type of system? You've got both those going on at the same time. What are the implications of that hybrid system and that massive transformation? I think we'd both agree there's a massive transformation going on, even if the old era isn't completely done. What are the implications of that for leaders at various levels and in various roles?
Yeah. So I think one is increased fragmentation. We've always had a super fragmented global health system, and it was fragmenting over the last decade or even 2 decades to a point where I think most of us working inside could not no longer keep overview. And also funders and donors said it's just too messy. They're not able to hold anybody accountable anymore or even follow all of the foundings of the new institutions and entities. So that fragmentation will probably increase even more because we've got now the new system still trying to thrive and mushroom. And we have the kind of system we're transitioning into with regionalism and more hubs and more national entities as well. So there's a huge amount to just keep an oversight of, even try to follow. And I think many of the global health colleagues I work with, they're just playing catch up with, oh, where's the Accra thing happening and what's happening with the Lusaka agenda and what's with these World Bank compact things. And they're just wasting all of their time trying to follow this fragmented space. The second point, in which I think is really important and what we're discussing today, is the what does this mean for leaders? There's going to be, or there already is, competition between leaders at the moment. It's not as explicit, I think, as I wish it would be. But you can see that some of the leaders from that kind of golden era model are really hunkering down and doubling down. And this is their rhetoric. We now have to do even more and invest more and rally the troops behind the old model. And then there are leaders who are starting to call for this new model. So whether it's, the Africa CDC or the AU, some of the new donors re-entering the space as well, who are more talking about the country-led and kind of country-funded agenda. And so there's a competition of leadership agendas, but it's also interesting because I see it as a competition of leadership types. That golden era leadership type is very much, I was successful, I raised those billions. It was because of this model that golden era even kind of existed. And the second type of leaders, which is again a bit more from the shift to the new era of global health, comes in with a lot more humility to say, I don't actually have the answers. I want to support what countries and communities say they need. I don't know how the new model will look like. So let's really brainstorm from the best people out there and try to figure this out together. And so there's this clash of two leadership types, one very alpha, one very kind of one-man show type of leader, and one which is a bit more fuzzy and collective, and you might not even be able to always pinpoint who are the leaders in that space. But you can see that there's a shift or a kind of fragmentation, polarization, I guess.
And one of the most important leadership positions in global health is the Director General of the World Health Organization. Election process is just about to get underway. The actual election takes place in May of 2027. But that means it's really kicking off and going pretty strong by May of 2026, which is just a few months away. What do you see in that mix in terms of the leadership that's needed for this new era in global health? It follows from what you were saying before. What criteria should the world be looking for in the next Director General of the World Health Organization?
It's going to be a super difficult position. I mean, the WHO has lost so much of its funding, just let go a huge chunk of its staff and expertise, and it's working in a hugely challenging political space where fundamental questions of the WHO's agenda, such as multilateralism or kind of science-driven work, is being questioned by some of the political radical parts and increasingly also by some of the center parties. So it's going to be, I think, a tough position to hold. The question is who will want to take on such a role. It has to be someone who has hugely strong diplomatic skills. I mean, you are navigating a geopolitical space that includes actors such as China trying to get the US back, an increasingly conflict-prone Latin America with PAHO, very self-determined, sovereignty-driven Africa, and you have all of these regions, in addition to your traditional high donor base, which is starting to cut multilateral investments. And so that diplomatic skill and also, of course, to fundraise is really important. But going back to our UHC discussion, this would be something I would love to see in the next DG is someone who can unite us again. So going back to the fragmented space question, I think, which is one of the parts that frustrates me so much because I feel like we're shooting ourselves in the foot every day by being so fragmented. Somebody who could say, what is it that unites us as a global health community, going really back to the basics. And in my blog, I cite a column by The Economist, and it's quoting the sports company Nike, which had very similar problems. It was just all over place. It was doing financial services and I don't know what. And the CEO in, I think it was 2023, came into his role and said, listen, we're a sports company. Like, we have a really simple agenda. This is what we do. This is what unites us. And then, yes, we need to grow because that is our purpose as a business. I think somebody who would have the humility to go to the basics and talk about what is maybe not the sexy innovations on AI and I don't know whatnot, and say, what is it that we're really about? What is it that unites every single person working on health? And it might be a feeling of, oh, we're going back to the 70s and, oh, somebody who's mentioning something like universal health coverage. But if we could really get the community to unite behind that and see a plan, a realistic plan for progress, I think that would help us a million miles more than having somebody who's really savvy and has periphery areas and pivots the organization in different directions again. Do. Yeah. And the last point, just knowing a lot of staff who have worked at WHO, and I know you have too, and the transformation. That organization has been in a transformation process for as long as I can remember, and it's just killing staff and it is sucking out the attentions. And this is a call for the donors as well, because they are the ones who are pushing for this constant transformation and matrix shifting and organizational diagram reorg, which is endless. And again, just focus, get some calm into it, work the diplomacy skills. And I think you have some hope for the WHO, which really needs to fight for its survival. I think that's where we're at the moment.
So you think it is actually under an existential threat?
I don't know if in global health, nothing is really ever under an existential threat because everything is left to peter out and kind of just die a very slow, painful death. I do think it is an existential question for its relevance. Can WHO be what it maybe was during the pandemic, what it was a couple of decades ago, before it became so chronically underfunded? Can it position itself in this new global health architecture? I think there's a huge opportunity, but that does require much more than just a really strong DG. It requires the donor community and the multilateral governance mechanisms to make those decisions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to also decide to have that shift of the global health into the future.
So you're focused on someone who will unify us, unify people in global health, organizations in global health. And by that, I know you mean countries and not only global institutions around a goal.
Yes.
For example, universal health coverage. Maybe just say a little bit more around platform to progress, because there's a lot of platforms with goals, even unifying goals, but there are very few people and leaders who actually measure honestly their progress toward those goals. I'll tell you, my top criterion would be a relentless focus on results. How does that fit into your vision of kind of a unifying goal, or does it fit into your vision?
Yeah. I mean, I think we agree. We'd love to see somebody who says, my measure of success and whether I should continue to have this role is on those results on the ground. So am I really delivering impact? And that means going far beyond what one organization is able to do, or WHO in this case is able to do. And so it's holding yourself accountable for things that you might not even be able to control, you might not even be able to influence. But that is I think, the ultimate reason why all of us are working in this space. We have to see something that is so much bigger than the parts we are working for, whether it's the organization, the partnerships, the kind of multilateral system. And if we could all unite behind and hold ourselves accountable behind that collective goal and have a focused one, as you said, measure our results accordingly, we would shift away from just need to fundraise X billion for my funding mechanism. I need to get this and this amount of money for my staff, which then always keeps limiting and narrowing the focus. And that's when we lose the results, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to not to put too fine a point on it, the that's a diplomacy and results, or diplomacy and accountability for results type of focus. Just as a little aside, I know you've always been strongly focused on health diplomacy. Sometimes I wonder in my dark moments whether this mantra of health is a political choice, which of course it is, really has squeezed out the issues of results and accountability in global health. You can be a global health leader and a global health diplomat and go and meet with leaders and commend them for what their countries are doing and be at all the most important meetings and still flatline on universal health coverage, for example. Do you think maybe there's too much? It's almost a counterfactual question. Too much emphasis on health as a political choice and not enough emphasis on we're going to hold ourselves accountable? Because those are really the two bulwarks undergirded by a type of humility, as you've been talking about through the whole conversation. Those are the two bulwarks here. Maybe just react against that and push back if you wish, because you've always been a health as a political choice person.
I have, and yet when those sound bites become quite empty and we stop thinking about what does it mean in practice, that's when we're lost, right? So I'm also a big fan of just sunsetting anything that becomes a buzzword and meaningless. Health is an investment, not a cost, is another one that I think most of us would like to put straight into the bin. Where I would see health as a political choice is health is always political. I would agree with that statement. So we cannot disconnect health from the human and social and political decision-making structures. I think that's really important for me. It's not just a medical science-based thing that we do in the lab and then miracles happen, right? That part I still believe in. Health as a political choice has become, as you said, a bit of a cop-out to say it's somebody else's choice. It's the country's choice. It's the donor's choice. It's some coalition's choice to go for it. But it puts the onus on somebody else instead of saying, I need to be part of this accountability and I also have agency. And so when, for example, Dr. Tedros at WHO DG, who loves using this statement as well, says health is a political choice, it sounds like, oh, you countries have to make this choice and decision, and we are completely without agency and responsibility in this. We can just advise you to do this. And where I would love us as a global health community, and this is really for each and every one of us, to say, we all are responsible and we all have to take the agency. And so we have to be really careful with these kind of big terms of somebody has to do it, and rather go back to what is it that I have to do as an individual working in this space? How do I work with the politics of health? How do I influence my organization, which is part of the ecosystem? We're never disconnected from this. And going back much more to the what is our role and responsibility? And as you said, ultimately, then the accountability piece as well.
Great. Is there anything you want to say about any other leadership roles? The UN Secretary General is coming up, for example. Same argument there around accountability for results, or and diplomacy, accountability for results. Does the balance look different to you?
There are quite a few elections, I think, for different multilateral institutions. And you mentioned the one that comes before WHO DG's selection process, which is already next year with the UN Secretary General. I think these are all important roles because we often in the global health sector, we're very insular. We're in our bubble and we might see some of the global health funds and WHO, maybe a couple of other institutions such as UNDP, maybe a WTO once in a while. But if we look at the whole kind of spectrum of issues that are there, all of these roles are really important. The more people we have that are also believers that health is an important issue, the better the system works as a whole. The UN Secretary General just has a very visible role. In the global health system, we might think the WHO does, but for a layperson, unless it's a pandemic, they will have no idea what is happening there. Whereas the UNSG can play such a function a bit more. So whether it's in a humanitarian crisis, whether it's in the geopolitics of it, whether it's in a war situation, they can elevate the agenda to the head of state issue as well, just have a bit of a different weighting there. So I think that election is going to be equally important. I wouldn't say it's more important, but probably very, very similar. And yes, of course, results there too. I mean, the multilateral system has been criticized, rightly so, for losing its focus on results. So what are we accountable for? We talked about universal health coverage, but the same on SDGs, right? This is something we've been talking and writing about together and separately as well. That same report every year, which says we have not progressed, we have not progressed, we have not progressed. And what are we going to do about it? Right? Yeah. Same
Yeah.
question there.
So there's more than one emperor that doesn't have any clothes. So as we move towards wrapping up, Katri, we covered a lot of ground here on leadership and the kind of future of global health and the intersection between those two and some specific roles. But at the end of the day, it's the young people that really are creating that future. So based on everything you know, everything you've experienced, everything we've discussed in the last just under an hour or so, what's your advice for young people who are contemplating a career in global health? A lot of them listen to this podcast. If you're speaking directly to young people who are early in their careers in global health or contemplating a career in global health, what would you advise them?
So glad you keep this issue at the center of everything you do, Peter. It's so important. So I speak to a lot of young people. I mentor a lot of people, and I also try to make space for conversations to people who are thinking about joining the sector or trying to progress in it. One thing that is really worrying a lot of young people, and this means anybody, I'd say under the age of 30, or even 40, is it even worth going in? They can sense that the global health space is not quite healthy, both in terms of the working culture, but also on issues such as, are we really trying to do something meaningful? And so, whereas we still talk about the emperor with clothes, I think for young people that that illusion has already dropped, and they are so purposeful. I mean, I know you know this from your kids. I definitely see in mine. They don't have the patience to just sit around in an office and have a career and just earn money. That's not what many young people are interested in. They see that the world is in a very challenging situation and they want to do something meaningful about it. So many of the conversations I have are, should I even join this sector if it is kind of not delivering and seems to be a bit of a toxic environment? And what I try to tell them is that there are so many good, talented people with the right intentions, and that we are seeing a generation shift as well. I mean, many of the people that I have admired and have been inspired by have either held leadership roles or are starting to really hold the top leadership roles too. And so we're seeing that shift in both the ways in working, in that humility, in the very, very intentional listening that these leaders are doing, and their absolute drive to deliver results. And I think that is something that I try to communicate and will continue to. We need more people like that. And if that is what you're interested in, please join us. If you are just interested in making money and having a nice cushioned UN job somewhere, go somewhere else. That golden era is over, as you said. And the second advice I have, and I know this is something you have encouraged me doing as well, Peter, is to remain courageous and really listen to your kind of inner moral compass, as I call it. So if something does not feel right, as you said, if you read that report for the 10th year and there is still no progress and everybody is still celebrating, be the person in the room to say, could I ask a question and say why? Because I've been thinking about it, and have the courage to do that and take that risk, because it would benefit our sector so much to have more people speaking out.
Those are great. Those are great bits of advice, Katri, for young people. I think they also apply to not so young people. And it's been wonderful to reconnect with you, Katri Bertram. Thank you very much for sharing those terrific insights. And it's been great to chat. Any last thoughts you want to share?
Thanks so much for having me, Peter. And I just hope this space stays engaging and that people will have these debates that we've been having today.
Same here. And we'll certainly continue to have them, and I'm sure many others will as well. Great to be with you, Katri. Thank you very much.
Thank you.